When my 3 grown offspring left me stranded at the doctor's office for 8 hours without a word, I realized they saw me as nothing more than a burden to manage. My name is Jade Russell, and at 58, I discovered that the people I'd sacrificed, everything for couldn't even be bothered to pick up their phone when I needed them most. But what they didn't know was that I'd been sitting on a family secret worth over $2 million, a trust fund from my late mother that I'd never touched, always planning to leave it to them. That day, sitting alone in that sterile waiting room, watching other families come and go while mine disappeared into their busy lives, something inside me shifted forever. I made a decision that would shock them to their core and change everything they thought they knew about their devoted, selfless mother. Sometimes the people who take you for granted need to learn what life looks like when you stop giving them everything they never appreciated. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Jade Russell, and for 35 years, I lived my life like a perfectly programmed machine designed to serve everyone except myself. I raised 3 offspring in our modest 2-story home in Oakwood Heights, a quiet suburban neighborhood about 20 minutes outside of Portland, Oregon. Every morning at exactly 5:30 a.m., I would wake up to start the coffee, pack lunches, and make sure everyone had what they needed before they rushed off to their important lives. Even now, at 58, with all of them grown and supposedly independent, my phone rang constantly with their demands disguised as requests. "Mom, can you watch Emma and Tyler this weekend?" That was Haley, my 32-year-old daughter who worked as a marketing coordinator downtown. She had inherited my people-pleasing tendencies but somehow directed them toward everyone except her own mother. "Mom, I need you to co-sign this loan application." That was Preston, my 29-year-old son who changed careers every 18 months and seemed to think my credit score was his personal safety net. "Mom, can you drive me to the airport at 4 a.m.? Uber's too expensive." That was Wyatt, my youngest at 26, a freelance graphic designer who had mastered the art of being financially irresponsible while maintaining an air of creative superiority. What none of them knew, what I had never told a single soul, was that I wasn't the struggling single mother they believed me to be. Hidden in a safety deposit box at Cascade Community Bank sat documentation for a trust fund worth $2.3 million that my mother had left me when she passed 15 years ago. The money came from my grandmother's successful chain of bakeries that had been sold in the 1990s. My mother, Eleanor Russell, had been a shrewd businesswoman who believed in keeping family wealth private. "Don't tell them about the money until they're mature enough to handle it responsibly," she had whispered to me from her hospital bed. "Watch how they treat you when they think you have nothing. That will tell you everything you need to know about their character." I had taken her advice to heart, perhaps too much so. For 15 years, I had lived modestly, working part-time at Maplewood Elementary as a teacher's aide, driving my reliable but aging Honda Civic, and shopping at discount stores. Meanwhile, I watched my offspring struggle with their finances, always bailing them out with what they assumed was my meager savings. I told myself I was teaching them the value of hard work and independence. But deep down, I was also protecting myself from the painful truth that my mother had suspected, that they might love my wallet more than they loved me. The pattern was always the same. One of them would call with a crisis. I would drop everything to help, and then they would disappear back into their busy lives until the next emergency. Haley would show up at my door every Sunday with her 2 kids, expecting me to entertain them while she scrolled through her phone or took business calls. She would raid my refrigerator, use my laundry facilities, and leave behind a mess that would take me hours to clean up. "Thanks, Mom. You're a lifesaver," she would say, kissing my cheek as she loaded the kids back into her SUV, never once asking how I was doing or if I needed anything. Preston was even worse. He had a talent for showing up just when I was sitting down to dinner, claiming he was in the neighborhood and was hungry. He would eat everything in sight while complaining about his latest job or girlfriend, expecting me to listen with endless patience and offer both emotional support and financial assistance. Last month, he had borrowed $3,000 for what he called a sure-thing investment opportunity. When I gently asked him about paying it back, he looked genuinely surprised. "Mom, I thought that was a gift. You know I'm trying to get my life together." Wyatt was perhaps the most manipulative of all, though he disguised it with charm and humor. He would show up with flowers and take me out to lunch, making me feel special and appreciated, only to casually mention at the end of our meal that his rent was due and he was a little short. "Just until my next client pays me, Mom. You know, how unpredictable freelance work can be." He always paid me back eventually, but only after I had to ask multiple times, and only after making me feel guilty for needing my own money. What hurt most was how they spoke about me to each other when they thought I couldn't hear. I had arrived early to Haley's house for Emma's birthday party and overheard them in the kitchen. "Mom's getting so clingy lately," Haley was saying as she arranged cupcakes on a platter. "She calls me every day just to chat. I barely have time to breathe." Preston laughed. "At least she doesn't show up at your work like she did to me last week. I had to introduce her to my boss. So embarrassing." Wyatt chimed in with his signature smirk. "We need to start setting boundaries. She's going to get weird and dependent as she gets older. We can't let her become one of those mothers who has no life outside her kids." I had stood frozen in the hallway, holding Emma's gift, feeling like someone had poured ice water directly into my veins. These were the people I had sacrificed my social life for, turned down romantic relationships for, and given my best years to. To them, I was already becoming a burden, a needy old woman who needed to be managed rather than loved. That conversation haunted me for weeks. I started paying attention to their behavior with new eyes, and what I saw made my stomach turn. They never called just to see how I was doing. They never invited me to anything unless they needed babysitting or help with something. When I tried to share news about my life, a new book I was reading, a walking group I had joined, a small promotion at work, their eyes would glaze over with barely concealed impatience. They were waiting for me to finish talking so they could get to the real reason for their visit. I began to wonder what would happen if I suddenly needed them instead of the other way around. What if I got sick? What if I had an emergency? Would they drop everything to help me the way I had always done for them? The thought terrified me because, deep in my heart, I already knew the answer. I had raised 3 beautiful, successful adults who saw me as a resource to be tapped rather than a person to be cherished. But I told myself that was just how modern families worked. Everyone was busy, everyone had their own problems, and surely when it really mattered, they would be there for me. After all, blood was thicker than water, and I was their mother. They owed me at least that much, didn't they? How naive I was. How completely, devastatingly naive. The morning that changed everything started like any other Tuesday in October. I had woken up with what I thought was just another tension headache, the kind I'd been getting more frequently since turning 58. But as I stood in my kitchen making my usual cup of Earl Grey tea, the pain suddenly intensified into something I'd never experienced before. It felt like someone was driving a railroad spike through the left side of my skull, and my vision began to blur at the edges. I gripped the granite countertop that Preston had installed for me last Christmas, one of his rare moments of genuine thoughtfulness, and tried to steady myself. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. This wasn't a normal headache. Something was seriously wrong. My first instinct, ingrained after decades of motherhood, was to call one of my offspring. They were adults now, responsible people with jobs and families and busy lives. But surely when their mother was in distress, they would drop everything to help. That's what family meant, wasn't it? I fumbled for my phone and dialed Haley's number first. She was always the most organized of the 3, the one who kept detailed calendars and prided herself on being reliable. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Haley Jordan. I'm probably in a meeting or chasing after my kids, but leave a message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can." "Haley, honey, it's Mom," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I'm having some kind of medical episode. Terrible headache, vision problems. I think I need to go to the doctor right away. Can you call me back as soon as you get this?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I hung up and immediately dialed Preston. The pain was getting worse, and I was starting to feel genuinely frightened. Preston's phone rang directly to voicemail without even ringing first. He must have declined the call. "Hey, it's Preston. You know what to do." The beep sounded and I left another message, this one more urgent. "Preston, I need you to call me back immediately. I'm having a medical emergency and I need someone to drive me to the doctor. Please, honey, this is important." My hands were shaking now, and the headache was so intense that I could barely think straight. I tried Wyatt next, my youngest, my baby, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and tell me I was the bravest person in the world. His phone went straight to voicemail, too. "Wyatt, please, I need help. Something's wrong with me and I can't drive myself. Please call me back." I set the phone down and leaned against the kitchen counter, trying to breathe through the pain. Surely one of them would call back within a few minutes. They were probably just busy, in meetings or dealing with their own morning routines. They would see my messages and realize this was serious. They would come. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The pain was now accompanied by a strange tingling sensation in my left arm, and I was beginning to panic. I called all 3 of them again, leaving increasingly desperate messages. "This is your mother, and I'm scared. I think I might be having a stroke or something serious. Please, someone call me back." Still nothing. It was then that the terrible reality began to sink in. I was completely alone. The 3 people I had devoted my life to, the ones I had trained to depend on me for everything, were not available when I needed them most. They had all grown accustomed to being the ones in crisis, the ones who needed rescuing. The idea that their capable, reliable mother might need help had never occurred to them as a real possibility. With trembling fingers, I managed to call 911. The dispatcher was kind and professional, asking me to describe my symptoms while she sent an ambulance to my address on Maple Street. "Are you alone, ma'am? Is there someone who can meet you at the hospital?" I have 3 grown offspring," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "But they're not answering their phones." "That's okay, honey. The paramedics will take good care of you, and you can try calling your family from the hospital." The ambulance arrived within 8 minutes, and I found myself being loaded onto a stretcher while my neighbor, Mrs. Chen from next door, watched from her front porch with concern. The paramedics were efficient and reassuring, checking my vital signs and asking questions about my medical history as we raced toward Sunset Valley Medical Center. "Do you have any chronic conditions? Are you taking any medications? Who should we contact as your emergency contact?" the female paramedic asked as she monitored my blood pressure. "My daughter Haley Jordan," I managed to say, giving them her number. "But she's not answering her phone." I saw the paramedics exchange a glance, the kind of look that said they'd seen this before. Elderly patients whose families were mysteriously unavailable during emergencies. It was a look of professional sympathy mixed with disappointment in humanity. At the hospital, I was quickly whisked into the emergency department and assigned to Dr. Rodriguez, a competent-looking woman in her 40s who immediately ordered a battery of tests. CT scan, blood work, neurological examination, the works. As I lay on the examination table in my hospital gown, feeling vulnerable and scared, I kept checking my phone for messages from my offspring. Nothing. "Mrs. Russell, Dr. Rodriguez said gently as she reviewed my test results. "The good news is that you're not having a stroke. What you experienced appears to be a severe migraine with some unusual neurological symptoms, possibly triggered by stress or hormonal changes. However, given the intensity and the fact that this is new for you, I'd like to keep you for observation and run a few more tests." "How long will that take?" I asked, my voice small and tired. "Probably most of the day. We'll need to monitor you for several hours and possibly do an MRI if your symptoms don't improve. Is there someone who can stay with you or pick you up later?" I looked down at my phone again. Still no calls, no texts, nothing. "I'm trying to reach my family," I said, quietly. Dr. Rodriguez nodded with understanding. "The nurses can help you make some calls if you need them to. Sometimes family members are more responsive when they hear from medical staff directly." The suggestion stung because it implied what I was already beginning to suspect, that my own voice, my own distress wasn't compelling enough to warrant their immediate attention, but a call from a hospital might actually get through to them. Nurse Patricia, a warm woman with graying hair and kind eyes, took my phone and tried calling each of my offspring. She left professional, urgent messages explaining that I was in the emergency department and needed someone to come to the hospital. "I'm sure they'll call back soon," she said with a reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Sometimes people panic when they hear hospital, and it takes them a moment to process the information. But as the hours ticked by and I was moved from the emergency department to a private room for extended observation, my phone remained stubbornly silent. Other patients had visitors coming and going. Spouses, siblings, adult offspring who rushed in with flowers and worried expressions. I watched through my partially open door as families gathered around bedsides, holding hands and asking doctors questions and bringing comfort food from home. And I sat alone in my hospital gown, with my phone charging on the bedside table, waiting for the people I had raised to remember that I existed. By late afternoon, I had received excellent medical care, been cleared of any serious conditions, and been informed that I could be discharged that evening. All I needed was someone to drive me home and keep an eye on me for the first few hours. "Have you heard from your family yet?" Nurse Patricia asked during her evening rounds, though her expression suggested she already knew the answer. I shook my head, not trusting my voice to remain steady. "Would you like me to try calling them again?" she offered gently. "No," I said, quietly. I think I understand now, and I did understand. Crystal clear, for the first time in 35 years, I understood exactly what I meant to the people I had sacrificed everything for. I was convenient when they needed something, invisible when they didn't. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Around 7 o'clock that evening, just as I was beginning to accept that I might need to call a taxi to get home, my phone finally buzzed with an incoming call. The relief that flooded through me was so intense it was almost embarrassing. I grabbed the phone eagerly, seeing Haley's name on the display. "Mom! Oh my God, I just got your messages!" Her voice was breathless and filled with what sounded like genuine panic. I was in back-to-back client meetings all day, and then Emma had a soccer practice emergency and my phone was on silent. "Are you okay? What happened?" The concern in her voice was like a warm blanket after hours of cold isolation. This was my daughter, my firstborn, the little girl who used to make me Mother's Day cards with crooked hearts and misspelled words declaring me the best mom ever. Of course she cared. Of course she would be there for me when it really mattered. "I'm at Sunset Valley Medical Center," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I had some kind of episode this morning. Terrible headache, vision problems. They think it was a severe migraine, but they want to keep me for observation." "A migraine? Mom, that's terrifying. Why didn't you call 911? "I did, honey. But I tried calling you first. All three of you." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry. You know how crazy my Tuesdays are with the Morrison account. And my phone has been acting up lately. I think I missed a bunch of notifications. But I'm here now, okay? Tell me everything." And just like that, I felt the tight knot in my chest begin to loosen. She was asking the right questions, using the right tone of voice, saying all the things I had needed to hear for the past 8 hours. I found myself explaining the morning's events in detail, describing the pain and the fear and the loneliness of sitting in the hospital room all day. "That sounds absolutely horrible," Haley said, and I could hear her gathering her things in the background. "I'm leaving work right now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Have the doctors said when you can go home?" "They're just waiting for someone to pick me up and stay with me for a few hours," I said, feeling lighter than I had all day. "Make sure I don't have any delayed symptoms." "Of course. I'll take you home and we can order Chinese food and watch one of those British mysteries you love. Emma and Tyler can spend the night at David's place. This is family emergency time." I actually felt tears of gratitude well up in my eyes. This was what I had needed, what I had expected from the beginning. My daughter was dropping everything to take care of me, rearranging her life to put my needs first, just like I had done for her countless times over the years. Blood was thicker than water after all. Family meant something. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered. "I was starting to think—" "Don't think anything," Haley interrupted firmly. "I'm your daughter and I love you. We're going to take care of this together." While I waited for her to arrive, I felt my faith in my offspring completely restored. Of course they had been busy. Of course there were explanations for their silence. Modern life was complicated. People had demanding jobs and responsibilities. The important thing was that when push came to shove, when I really needed them, they came through. I even started making excuses for Preston and Wyatt in my mind. Preston was probably in some important meeting with potential investors. He'd been working so hard to get his latest business venture off the ground. And Wyatt was likely absorbed in a creative project. You know how artists could be when they were in the zone. They would call back eventually, probably feeling terrible that they had missed their mother's emergency. 20 minutes later, I heard familiar footsteps in the hallway outside my room, and Haley appeared in the doorway looking appropriately worried and slightly out of breath. She was wearing her sharp black business suit and carrying her leather briefcase, but her usually perfect hair was a bit disheveled and her makeup was smudged around her eyes. "Mom!" She rushed to my bedside and gave me a careful hug, as if I might break. "You look so pale. How are you feeling now?" "Much better now that you're here," I said honestly. "The headache is almost gone, and the doctors say all my tests came back normal." "Thank God," she said, sinking into the visitor's chair beside my bed. "You scared me to death. When I finally listened to your voicemails..." She shook her head. "I felt like such a terrible daughter." "You're not terrible," I assured her quickly. "You're here now, and that's what matters." We spent the next hour talking while we waited for Dr. Rodriguez to complete my discharge paperwork. Haley was attentive and caring, asking about my symptoms, wanting to know exactly what the doctors had said, even taking notes on her phone about follow-up care instructions. She seemed genuinely invested in my well-being, and I found myself thinking that maybe I had been too harsh in my judgment of my offspring's behavior over the years. "Has Preston called back yet?" she asked, glancing at my phone. "Or Wyatt?" "Not yet," I admitted. "But I'm sure they will once they get the messages." Haley said, and I detected a slight edge to her voice. "Preston's probably buried in one of his projects. You know how he gets tunnel vision. And Wyatt..." She trailed off, then seemed to catch herself. "Well, they'll call back soon, I'm sure." When Dr. Rodriguez finally appeared with my discharge papers, Haley was the picture of a devoted daughter. She asked intelligent questions about warning signs to watch for, made sure she understood all the instructions for my care, and even requested the doctor's business card in case we had questions. Later, "Your daughter seems very responsible," Dr. Rodriguez commented to me as Haley stepped out to bring her car around to the pickup area. You're lucky to have someone so attentive." "Yes," I said, feeling proud and grateful. "She really is wonderful." The ride home was comfortable and reassuring. Haley had stopped at our favorite Chinese restaurant and picked up hot and sour soup, which she said would be perfect for someone recovering from a medical episode. She helped me into my pajamas, made sure I had water and pain medication within, reached and settled in on my living room couch with her laptop to work while keeping an eye on me. "I'm going to stay the night," she announced. "Doctor's orders, right? Someone needs to monitor you for delayed symptoms." "You don't have to do that," I protested, though I secretly hoped she would stay. "I know you have Emma and Tyler to think about." "David's got them handled," she said dismissively. "My mother had a medical emergency. Everything else can wait." For the first time in months, maybe even years, I felt truly cared for. Haley made me tea without being asked, fluffed my pillows when I wanted to lie down, and even suggested we watch one of the British detective shows I loved. As we settled in together on the couch, her laptop balanced on her knees while she worked and kept me company simultaneously, I felt foolish for doubting her earlier. This was what family meant. This was what love looked like. When the crisis was real, when the need was genuine, my offspring came through for me. All those years of putting them first had created a bond that couldn't be broken by busy schedules or modern life complications. "I love you, sweetheart," I said softly as she typed away on her computer, occasionally glancing over to check on me. "I love you too, Mom," she replied without looking up from her screen. "We're going to take good care of you." And in that moment, I believed her completely. I believed that I mattered to them as more than just a convenient resource. I believed that my years of sacrifice and devotion had created the kind of deep, unshakable family loyalty that would always be there when I needed it most. I believed that this crisis had revealed the best in my offspring, not the worst. How spectacularly wrong I was about to discover I had been. The next morning started beautifully. Haley had made coffee before I even woke up, and the smell of French roast drifted through my house like a promise that everything was going to be okay. I found her in my kitchen, already dressed for work, scrolling through her phone while sipping from my favorite mug, the one that said "World's Greatest Mom" that she had given me for Mother's Day 3 years ago. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked, looking up with what seemed like genuine concern. "Any headaches? Vision problems?" "I feel much better," I said honestly. "Thank you so much for staying with me. I can't tell you how much it meant." "Of course, Mom," she interrupted, but her attention had already shifted back to her phone. "Listen, I need to head into the office early today. The Morrison presentation is this afternoon, and I'm barely prepared. But you're feeling better, right? No more symptoms?" "Right. No symptoms," I confirmed, though I felt a small pang of disappointment that she was already focused on leaving. "You've been so wonderful, honey." I was thinking maybe... My phone rang, cutting off my sentence. Preston's name flashed on the screen, and I felt a surge of relief. Finally, my middle son was calling back. "Preston," I answered eagerly. "Did you get my messages from yesterday?" "Yeah, Mom, sorry about that." His voice sounded distracted, like he was multitasking. "Haley texted me this morning and said you had some kind of headache situation. You're fine now, though, right?" I blinked, processing his words. "Some kind of headache situation?" I repeated slowly. "Preston, I was in the hospital for 8 hours yesterday. I thought I might be having a stroke. But you weren't, right? Haley said it was just a migraine or something. Good thing it wasn't serious." There was the sound of papers shuffling in the background. "Listen, Mom, I'm actually calling because I need a favor. I know the timing isn't great, but I'm supposed to meet with this investor today and my car is making that weird noise again. Could I borrow yours? Just for a few hours?" I stood in my kitchen, holding the phone, feeling like I was having an out-of-body experience. My son was asking to borrow my car on the morning after I'd spent a day in the hospital, and he was treating my medical emergency like a minor inconvenience that was now resolved. "Preston," I said carefully, I just got out of the hospital yesterday. I'm supposed to be taking it easy. I know. But you're feeling better now, right? And it's not like you have anywhere important to go today. This investor meeting could change everything for me, Mom. You know how hard I've been working on this project. Before I could respond, Haley, who had been listening to my side of the conversation, reached for my phone. "Let me talk to him," she said. "Preston, it's Haley. Look, Mom's fine now, but she needs her car in case she has any follow-up appointments or needs to go to the pharmacy or whatever." She paused, listening to his response. "Well, why don't you just rent a car or take an Uber?" I could hear Preston's voice getting louder through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. Haley rolled her eyes. "Fine, whatever. Figure it out yourself," she said, handing me back the phone. He hung up. "What did he say?" I asked. "He said we don't understand how important this meeting is and that he can't afford to rent a car right now." She shook her head in annoyance. "Honestly, Preston's always so dramatic about his business ventures." I was about to respond when my phone rang again. This time it was Wyatt. "Mom, Haley told me you were in the hospital yesterday." His voice was full of energy and concern. "Are you okay? What happened?" Finally, I thought. At least Wyatt sounded appropriately worried. "I'm much better now," I said, launching into an explanation of the previous day's events. "I tried calling all of you, but—" "I'm so sorry I missed your calls," Wyatt interrupted. "I was at this art installation opening in the Pearl District, and you know how those events are. No cell service, super loud, total creative chaos. I didn't even see your messages until this morning." "That's okay, honey. I understand. The important thing is that you're okay now," he continued. "And actually, since you're feeling better, I was wondering if I could ask you something. You know that graphic design competition I told you about? The one with the $5,000 prize?" My heart sank. Here it comes, I thought. "Well, the entry fee is due today, and it's $500. I know it's a lot, but Mom, I really think I have a chance of winning this thing. My portfolio is stronger than it's ever been. It could be the break I've been waiting for. I looked over at Haley, who was shaking her head in disgust while she gathered her things for work. She mounted the word "unbelievable" at me. "Wyatt," I said slowly, "I just spent yesterday in the hospital. Don't you think—" I know. And I feel terrible about that. But you're okay now, right? The doctor said it wasn't serious. And this deadline is today, Mom. I've been working toward this for months." "Can't you ask your father for the money?" I asked weakly. "You know Dad doesn't support my art career. He thinks it's a waste of time. You're the only one who believes in me, Mom. Please?" I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar weight of manipulation settling over me like a heavy blanket. Even in the aftermath of a medical emergency, my offspring were treating me like an ATM with legs. "I need to think about it," I said. "But the deadline is today," Wyatt pressed. "If I don't submit by 5 o'clock, I said I need to think about it," I repeated, more firmly this time. After I hung up, Haley was staring at me with a mixture of sympathy and frustration. "Mom, please tell me you're not seriously considering giving him that money." "He says it's an investment in his future," I said, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. "His future? What about your future? What about your health?" Haley's voice was rising. "You were in the hospital yesterday, and all he can think about is getting money from you for some art contest." I felt a flicker of hope that at least Haley understood how inappropriate the request was. At least one of my offspring had some sense of priorities. "You're right," I said. "It is pretty insensitive timing." "Exactly," Haley agreed. "Which is why I think you should give the money to me instead." I stared at her. "What?" "Well, if you're going to spend $500 on one of us, it should go towards something practical. Emma needs new soccer cleats and equipment for the spring season, and Tyler's been asking for that coding camp all summer. At least with me, You know the money would go towards something worthwhile, not some pipe dream art contest. The kitchen fell silent except for the humming of my refrigerator. I stood there, looking at my daughter, my firstborn, the one who had stayed with me overnight, the one who had seemed so caring and devoted just 12 hours earlier, and realized that her concern hadn't been about my well-being at all. So let me understand this correctly, I said slowly. You want me to give you the money instead of Wyatt because your requests are more practical than his? I'm just saying, if you're going to help one of us, neither of you, I said quietly, has asked me how I'm feeling today. Neither of you has asked if I need anything. Preston wants my car, Wyatt wants $500, and you want me to give it to you instead. All of this less than 24 hours after I spent a day alone in the hospital thinking I might be dying. Haley's face flushed red. That's not fair, Mom. I stayed with you all night. I took care of you. You stayed with me all night because the doctor said someone needed to monitor me for symptoms. You took care of me because I needed medical supervision, not because you wanted to spend time with me. That's not true. But even as she protested, I could see the guilt flickering in her eyes. Isn't it? I asked. Tell me, Haley, if the doctor hadn't required someone to stay with me, would you have gone home to your own family last night? The question hung in the air between us. We both knew the answer. I have responsibilities, Mom, she said defensively. I have a job, a husband, 2 kids. I can't just drop everything every time. Every time what? I interrupted. Every time your mother has a medical emergency? How often do you think that happens, Haley? She looked down at her expensive shoes, the ones I had helped her buy when she got her promotion last year. I need to get to work, she mumbled. Of course you do, I said. As she gathered her briefcase and headed toward the door, she paused and turned back to me. About the money, Mom. For Emma and Tyler, it really would be more practical than whatever Wyatt wants it for. And there it was. Even in the midst of our argument, even after being called out for her selfishness, she was still angling for money. My medical emergency hadn't brought out her protective instincts or her love for me. It had simply created an opportunity for her to position herself as the most deserving recipient of my financial support. After she left, I sat alone in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of her caregiving performance, the coffee mug, the crumpled tissues she'd brought me, the pill organizer she'd helpfully arranged. All of it now felt like props in a play designed to make me feel obligated to her. For the first time in my adult life, I saw my offspring clearly, not as the grateful, loving people I had raised them to be, but as the calculating, self-interested adults they had actually become, and it broke something inside me that I hadn't even known was fragile. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in Dr. Rodriguez's office for a follow-up appointment, staring at a stack of referral papers she had just handed me. The headaches had returned sporadically, and she wanted me to see a neurologist for some additional testing. Nothing serious, she assured me, just being thorough. The appointment is next Tuesday at 2 p.m. with Dr. Kim at the Northwest Neurology Clinic, she explained. It's about a 20-minute drive from your house, and you'll need someone to drive you home afterward, because we'll be doing some tests that might affect your vision temporarily. I nodded, already dreading the conversation I would need to have with my offspring. The past 3 weeks had been a masterclass in disappointment. After our confrontation about the money, Haley had grown distant and cool, calling only when she needed something and treating me with the kind of polite formality you'd reserve for a difficult client. Preston had eventually borrowed money from someone else for his investor meeting, which had gone nowhere as usual, and was now avoiding my calls entirely, probably because he owed me money from 3 different previous emergencies. Wyatt had found another way to pay his contest entry fee, but not before making me feel guilty for refusing to help him during what he called his time of artistic breakthrough. But this was medical. This was important. Surely they would understand that I needed support for something health-related. I called Haley first, as always. "Mom, Tuesday at 2 p.m.?" she said, and I could hear her flipping through her calendar. That's right in the middle of Emma's parent-teacher conference. I've had that scheduled for months. Can't you reschedule? The doctor said it was important to get this done soon, I explained. And this was the earliest available appointment. There was a long pause. What about Preston or Wyatt? Can't one of them take you? I thought I'd try you first since you're usually the most organized, I said, hoping flattery might work. I really can't miss Emma's conference, Mom. Her math grades have been slipping and David can't go because he has that big presentation. Maybe Preston can rearrange his schedule. Before I could respond, she had already moved on. Oh, and speaking of schedules, I need to ask you a favor. David and I are thinking of taking a long weekend trip to the coast next month, just the two of us. Could you watch Emma and Tyler? It would just be Friday night through Sunday evening. I closed my eyes. Even when turning down my request for help, she was simultaneously asking me for something. Let me call Preston and Wyatt first, I said. About the doctor's appointment. Okay, but let me know about the weekend thing soon, okay? I need to book the hotel. Preston's response was even more frustrating. Tuesday? Mom, that's the day I'm supposed to pick up my new business partner from the airport. This could be the partnership that finally gets my company off the ground. Can't you just take an Uber? Preston, it's a medical appointment. I might not be able to see clearly afterward. So take an Uber there and back. What's the big deal? The big deal is that I'm your mother, and I'm asking for help with something important. And I'm your son who's trying to build a future for himself. This partnership means everything to me, Mom. You know how many times I've been let down by potential investors. I can't reschedule something this important. More important than your mother's health? It's just a doctor's appointment, Mom. It's not like you're having surgery. By the time I called Wyatt, I was already feeling the familiar sting of rejection, but I tried to keep hope alive. Oh man, Mom, Tuesday afternoon? I've got this huge deadline for a client project. It's for a tech startup and they're paying me more than I've ever made for a single job. I literally cannot miss this deadline or I'll lose the contract. Can't you work on it in the evening instead? It's a 12-hour project minimum. I was planning to start Monday night and work straight through until Wednesday morning. This is my big break, Mom. The kind of job that could lead to steady corporate work. So you can't spare 2 hours to drive your mother to a medical appointment? I'm really sorry, but this is about my career. You understand, right? You always taught us to prioritize our professional growth. I hung up the phone and stared at it for a long moment. All three of my offspring had effectively told me that their commitments, a parent-teacher conference, a business meeting, and a freelance project, were more important than ensuring I got to a medical appointment safely. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 35 years, I had canceled my own plans, rescheduled my own appointments, and put my own priorities on hold whenever any of them needed anything. But when I asked for the same consideration, they all had reasons why their time was more valuable than mine. I ended up calling a medical transport service, paying $75 for a round trip to the neurology clinic. It felt humiliating, sitting in the back of a van with 2 other elderly patients, being driven around like we were all helpless and forgotten. The appointment itself went fine. Dr. Kim was thorough and kind, and the tests showed nothing concerning. But as I sat in the van afterward, my vision still slightly blurry from the eye drops they'd used, I felt more alone than I had in my entire life. When I got home, there were 3 voicemails waiting for me. Haley. Hi, Mom. Just checking in. Hope. Your appointment went well. Call me back about watching the kids next month, okay? Preston. Hey, Mom. The airport pickup got moved to Wednesday, so I actually could have driven you after all. Oops. Hope everything went okay? Wyatt. Mom, I finished my project early. I could have totally taken you to your appointment. Why didn't... You tell me you were taking one of those medical transport things? I would have felt terrible if I'd known you were doing that. Each message was a masterpiece of guilt manipulation disguised as concern. None of them had actually changed their plans to help me. Preston's meeting had been moved by the other person. Wyatt had finished early by luck, and Haley still wanted me to babysit for her romantic getaway. But more than that, each of them had found a way to make my solution, hiring professional help, seem like something I should have consulted them about first. As if my independence was somehow inconsiderate to them. That evening, I was trying to make dinner when my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson from across the street, knocked on my door. She was holding a casserole dish and wearing the kind of concerned expression that made my stomach clench. "Jade, honey, I saw that medical transport van today. Is everything okay?" "Just a follow-up appointment," I said, trying to sound casual. "Nothing serious." "Where were your kids?" she asked bluntly. Mrs. Patterson had never been one to dance around sensitive topics. "They were all busy with work," I said, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. Mrs. Patterson studied my face for a moment. "Jade, can I ask you something? And please don't take this the wrong way." I nodded, though I already knew I wasn't going to like what she had to say. "When was the last time any of your offspring did something for you without being asked? Or even after being asked?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to defend them, to list examples of their thoughtfulness and care, but nothing came out. Because as I stood there searching my memory, I couldn't think of a single instance in recent years where any of them had voluntarily helped me or even shown interest in my well-being without wanting something in return. "I see them coming and going all the time," Mrs. Patterson continued gently. "Always in a hurry, always carrying things out to their cars instead of bringing things in. When my Harold was sick, our kids took turns staying with us, bringing groceries, helping with the yard work. They treated our house like a second home because we needed care. But your kids..." She trailed off diplomatically. "My kids treat my house like a convenience store," I finished quietly. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and finally allowed myself to face the truth I'd been avoiding for years. My offspring didn't love me. They loved what I provided for them. They loved my availability, my willingness to sacrifice, my inability to say no. They loved having a mother who was always there to clean up their messes, fund their dreams, and ask for nothing in return. But me? The actual person behind all that service? They barely knew I existed, and the most humiliating part was that I had trained them to treat me this way. For 35 years, I had taught them that my needs didn't matter, that my time wasn't valuable, that my role in their lives was to give and never receive. I had been so afraid of being a burden that I had made myself invisible. I had created my own irrelevance. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I called in sick to work, not because I was physically ill, but because I needed time to think. I needed time to figure out who I was when I wasn't being useful to someone else. And as I sat in my quiet house, drinking coffee from my world's greatest mom mug, I realized that I had no idea how to answer that question. I had spent so many years being defined by my relationships to other people that I had forgotten I was supposed to be a person in my own right. The scariest part wasn't that my offspring didn't care about me. The scariest part was that I was starting to understand why. The day after my revelation about creating my own irrelevance, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. I spent the entire morning in bed, not because I was sick, but because I simply didn't want to get up and perform the role of available mother for anyone who might need something from me. My phone buzzed repeatedly with text messages, but for the first time in decades, I ignored them. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about Mrs. Patterson's question. When was the last time any of my offspring had done something for me without being asked? The more I thought about it, the more disturbing the answer became. Not only couldn't I remember a recent example, but I was starting to realize that I had actively discouraged them from helping me over the years. Whenever they had offered assistance as younger adults, I had waved them off with, "Oh, don't worry about it. I've got it handled." Or, "You're so busy, I can manage." I had trained them to believe that I didn't need anything from anyone. But why had I done that? As I lay there examining my own motivations, the uncomfortable truth began to emerge. I had been terrified that if I asked for help and they said no, it would prove that they didn't really love me. So instead of risking rejection, I had made myself so useful, so indispensable, that I thought they would have to love me. What a spectacular miscalculation that had been. Around noon, I finally forced myself to check my phone. 7 text messages and 3 missed calls. Haley. "Mom, can you pick up Emma from school today? David's car is in the shop and I have a client dinner." Haley again. "Mom, are you there? I really need an answer about Emma." Preston. "Hey Mom, quick favor. Can you swing by my apartment and let the repair guy in? I'm stuck at work and he can only come between 1 to 3 p.m. Wyatt. "Mom, emergency. My laptop died and I have a presentation tomorrow. Can I borrow yours? I'll come pick it up this afternoon." Preston again. "Mom, the repair guy is coming in an hour. Where are you?" Haley again. "Mom, Emma's school just called. Where are you?" Wyatt. "Mom, seriously, I need your laptop. This is urgent." I stared at the messages, feeling a mixture of amazement and disgust. Here I was, having the most significant, emotional crisis of my adult life, questioning everything about my relationships and my identity, and their response was to bombard me with requests for favors. None of them had asked how I was feeling after my medical appointment. None of them had even acknowledged that I might have needs of my own. The final message was from Haley. "I had to leave work early to get Emma. This really messed up my day. Please call me." That message broke something loose inside me. This really messed up my day. As if my failure to be available on demand was an inconvenience she was suffering, rather than a sign that something might be wrong with me. I set the phone aside and got dressed slowly, deliberately. For the first time in years, I was going to do something for myself without asking permission or apologizing for it. I drove to the Oakwood Heights Community Center, a place I had driven past hundreds of times but never entered. I parked in the small lot and walked through the front doors, not sure what I was looking for, but knowing I needed to be somewhere that wasn't my house, surrounded by reminders of how thoroughly I had erased myself from my own life. The community center was buzzing with activity. Senior citizens were playing cards in one room, a book club was meeting in another, and there was some kind of art class happening in the back. I wandered through the hallways, reading bulletin boards advertising everything from cooking classes to travel groups to volunteer opportunities. "Can I help you find something?" a cheerful voice asked behind me. I turned to see a woman about my age with short gray hair and kind eyes. She was wearing a name tag that said, "Volunteer Coordinator, Alexa Coleman." "I'm not sure," I said honestly. I think I need to figure out who I am when I'm not taking care of other people." Alexa smiled warmly. "That's the best reason. I've heard all week for someone to walk through those doors. I'm Alexa. What's your name?" "Jade Russell." "Nice to meet you, Jade. Tell me, what kind of things did you enjoy before you became everyone's go-to person?" The question caught me off guard because I couldn't immediately answer it. What had I enjoyed? When had I last done something purely because I wanted to, not because someone else needed me to do it? I used to love reading, I said slowly, and I always wanted to learn photography, but I never had time. "Well, we have a book club that meets every Thursday morning, and there's a photography group that takes weekend trips around the Portland area. Both groups are always looking for new members." "I couldn't do weekends," I said automatically. "That's when my family..." I stopped myself mid-sentence, realizing what I was doing. Actually, maybe I could do weekends. Alexa raised an eyebrow. Family obligations? Something like that. I found myself telling her about my 3 offspring, their constant demands, and my growing realization that I had become invisible in my own life. She listened without judgment, nodding occasionally and asking thoughtful questions. "How old are your kids?" she asked. 26, 29, and 32. "And they still expect you to drop everything whenever they need something?" "I've always been available," I said defensively, then caught myself. I made myself always available. There's a difference between being a loving mother and being a servant, Jade. Your kids are adults. They should be solving their own problems and offering to help you with yours, not the other way around. The words hit me like a revelation. I think I've been confusing love with service, I admitted. A lot of women our age do that, Alexa said, gently. We were raised to believe that our value came from how useful we were to other people. But you know what? Your kids learn to be independent because you taught them to be independent. They don't need you to solve their problems anymore. They want you to because it's easier for them, but they don't need you to. As I walked back to my car an hour later, armed with brochures for the book club, photography group, and a watercolor painting class, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Excitement about my own future. But I also felt something else. Anger. When I got home, my phone was buzzing again. More messages from all 3 offspring, increasingly frantic and accusatory. Preston, "Mom, I had to take a half day from work because you didn't let the repair guy in. This cost me money." Haley, "Where were you today?" Emma was confused and upset. "When I had to pick her up instead of you." "You've never been unreliable before." Wyatt, "I missed my presentation deadline because I couldn't get your laptop. I might lose this client. Where were you?" Each message was phrased as if my absence had caused them harm, as if my failure to be instantly available was a betrayal of our relationship. None of them had asked if I was okay. None of them had wondered if something might be wrong. They had simply assumed that I existed solely for their convenience and were angry that I had malfunctioned. For the first time in my adult life, I didn't call them back to apologize and explain. I didn't rush to fix whatever problems my absence had created. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and really looked at the responses I had received. These weren't the reactions of people who loved me. These were the reactions of people who had lost access to a service they had taken for granted. I thought about the $2.3 million sitting in that safety deposit box, the inheritance I had been planning to leave to them for 15 years. I had convinced myself that I was being generous, that I was securing their futures. But now I wondered, what would happen if they knew about that money? Would they suddenly become more attentive, more loving? Or would they simply see me as an even more valuable resource to be managed and manipulated? My mother's words echoed in my memory. Watch how they treat you when they think you have nothing. That will tell you everything you need to know about their character. I had watched. For 15 years I had watched. And what I had seen was 3 adults who saw their mother as a convenience, not a person worthy of love and respect. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I picked up my phone and, for the first time in decades, turned it off completely. Then I made myself a cup of tea, opened one of the books I'd bought months ago but never had time to read, and settled into my favorite chair. For once in my life, I was going to do something purely for my own enjoyment, without worrying about who might need me or what emergency might arise. It felt terrifying. It felt revolutionary. And most surprisingly of all, it felt like coming home to myself. 2 weeks. Into my tentative rebellion, I had established a small but meaningful routine for myself. Thursday mornings were for the book club, where I had discovered that I had strong opinions about literature that people actually wanted to hear. Saturday afternoons were for the photography group, where I was learning to see the world through my own lens instead of through the needs of others. And every evening I spent at least an hour reading with my phone turned off, creating a small sanctuary of peace in my own home. But my offspring were not adjusting well to my reduced availability. The complaints had escalated from irritated text messages to lengthy phone calls filled with accusations and guilt trips. Haley had started showing up at my house unannounced, claiming she was worried about my mental health because I wasn't responding to requests as quickly as usual. Preston had begun leaving increasingly dramatic voicemails about how my new attitude was affecting his ability to focus on his business ventures. And Wyatt had started calling me selfish, saying I was abandoning my family just when he needed support the most. But I had been holding firm. I was learning to say, I'm not available, instead of dropping everything to solve their problems. I was discovering that the emergencies they brought to me were rarely actual emergencies. They were just situations that required effort or planning on their part, which they preferred to outsource to me. The breaking point came on a Tuesday, evening in late November. I had just returned from my first solo photography expedition to the Columbia River Gorge, feeling more alive and creative than I had in years. I had spent the entire day capturing images of waterfalls and autumn foliage, eating lunch alone at a scenic overlook, and talking to other photographers about technique and equipment. For 8 glorious hours, I had been Jade the person, not Jade the mother. I was uploading my photos to my laptop, excited to share them with my photography group, when I heard the familiar sound of a key in my front door lock. Only my offspring had keys to my house, and none of them had called to say they were coming over. Haley walked in without knocking, followed by Preston and Wyatt. All 3 of them looked serious and determined, like they were arriving for some kind of intervention. "Mom, we need to talk," Haley announced, setting her purse down on my coffee table and taking a seat on my couch as if she owned the place. "About what?" I asked, though I already suspected this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "About your behavior lately?" Preston said, settling into my favorite armchair without being invited to sit down. "We're concerned about you." Concerned how? Wyatt remained standing, pacing near my front window like he was too agitated to sit still. "Mom, you've been acting really weird lately. Not answering your phone, refusing to help when we need you, going off on these random day trips by yourself. It's not like you." "Maybe I'm discovering who I really am," I said quietly. "Or maybe you're having some kind of breakdown," Haley shot back. "Mom, you missed Emma's school play last week because you were at some photography thing. You've never missed one of the kids' events before. You didn't invite me to Emma's school play?" I pointed out. "You told me about it afterward and seemed surprised that I wasn't there." "We shouldn't have to invite you to your own granddaughter's events," Haley snapped. "You should just know to be there." "How would I know if no one tells me?" "Because you usually keep track of these things," Preston interjected. "You usually stay on top of everyone's schedules and make sure you're available when we need you." There it was, the truth laid bare. They expected me to manage their lives, keep track of their needs, and remain constantly available for their convenience. The idea that I might have my own schedule, my own interests, my own life, was genuinely bewildering to them. "Let me ask you something," I said, looking at each of them in turn. "When was the last time any of you asked me how I was doing? Not when you needed something from me, just because you cared about my well-being?" They exchanged glances, and I could see them searching their memories. "We ask how you are all the time," Wyatt said defensively. "No, you ask how I am as a preface to asking for something else. When was the last time you called just to check on me?" The silence that followed was damning. "That's different," Haley said finally. "You're our mother. We know you're fine because you're always taking care of everyone else. If something was wrong, you'd tell us." Would I? When have I ever been allowed to not be fine? When have any of you made space for me to have problems or needs of my own? This is ridiculous, Preston said, standing up abruptly. Mom, you're being dramatic. We're here because we care about you. And frankly, your behavior has been selfish lately. Selfish, I repeated slowly. Taking 1 day a week for myself is selfish. When you have family obligations, yes, Haley said firmly. When you have grandchildren who need you and kids who depend on your support, taking off to play photographer is selfish. Kids? I looked at her incredulously. You're 32 years old, Haley. Preston is 29, and Wyatt is 26. You're not kids. You're adults who have been trained to treat your mother like an unpaid employee. That's not fair, Wyatt protested. We appreciate everything you do for us. Do you? Then why are you here demanding that I go back to doing it? Because families support each other, Haley said, her voice rising. Because that's what mothers do. And what do grown offspring do? I asked. In your version of family, what are your responsibilities to me? Again, silence. I'll tell you what you think your responsibilities are, I continued, feeling a surge of clarity and anger. You think your responsibility is to exist and let me serve you. To accept my help graciously and provide me with the occasional thank you to keep me motivated. To include me in your lives just enough that I feel needed, but not so much that it inconveniences you. Mom, that's not... Preston started. Let me finish, I said, standing up from my chair. For 35 years, I have organized my entire life around your needs. I have canceled plans, spent money I couldn't afford, sacrificed relationships, and put my own dreams on hold because I thought that's what good mothers did. But you know what I've learned recently? They stared at me, clearly uncomfortable with this version of their mother. I've learned that I raised 3 selfish, entitled adults who see love as a service they're owed rather than a relationship they participate in. I've learned that I taught you to take me for granted by never asking you to give anything back. And I've learned that the person I've become in the process, the woman who has no identity outside of her usefulness to others, is someone I don't even recognize anymore. Mom, you're being crazy, Wyatt said. But his voice lacked conviction. Tell me, when was the last time any of you did something for me without being asked? When was the last time you offered to help me with anything? When was the last time you considered what I might want instead of what you needed from me? The silence stretched so long it became uncomfortable. That's what I thought, I said quietly. You don't know how to love me. You only know how to use me. That's a horrible thing to say, Haley whispered, tears forming in her eyes. It's a horrible thing to realize, I replied. But it's the truth, and we all know it. I walked to my front door and opened it. I think you should leave now, I said. I have some decisions to make about my life, and I need to make them without worrying about how they'll affect your convenience. Mom, you can't be serious, Preston said, but he was already moving toward the door. I'm more serious than I've ever been, I said. For the first time in decades, I'm putting myself first, and if that makes me selfish in your eyes, then so be it. As they filed out of my house, Haley turned back to me one more time. This isn't over, Mom. We're not going to let you destroy our family because you're having some kind of midlife crisis. Our family was destroyed a long time ago, I said. I'm just finally admitting it. After they left, I sat alone in my living room, shaking with adrenaline and something that felt like freedom. For the first time in my adult life, I had chosen myself over their comfort. I had spoken my truth instead of managing their feelings, and it felt terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely necessary. I picked up my phone and called the one person who had shown me what genuine care looked like. Alexa? It's Jade. I think. I'm ready to make some big changes in my life, and I'm going to need some support. I'm here, she said simply. Whatever you need. And for the first time in years, I believed that someone actually meant it. The morning after my confrontation with my offspring, I woke up feeling like I had survived an earthquake. Everything in my house looked the same, but the foundation of my entire life had shifted irreversibly. For the first time in decades, I had no one to take care of, no one making demands on my time, and no one expecting me to solve their problems. It was simultaneously liberating and terrifying. My phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m. with angry text messages from all three of them, but I didn't read them. Instead, I got dressed, made myself a proper breakfast, and drove to the community center to meet Alexa for the coffee she had suggested when I called her the night before. I found her in the center's small cafe, sitting at a corner table with 2 steaming mugs and a warm smile that made something tight in my chest begin to loosen. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked as I sat down across from her. "Like I just jumped out of an airplane," I admitted, terrified but also free. "That sounds about right," she laughed. "Breaking free from toxic family dynamics feels exactly like that, scary and exhilarating at the same time." I took a sip of the coffee she'd ordered for me. Somehow she had remembered that I preferred it with cream and sugar, and felt genuinely cared for in a way that seemed almost foreign after years of being the one who remembered everyone else's preferences. "I keep waiting for them to call and apologize," I said, "to realize that they've been treating me badly and want to make it right." Alexa's expression was gentle, but realistic. "How likely do you think that is, based on their behavior?" "Last night?" I thought about their accusations, their indignation at my selfishness, their complete inability to understand why I might want a life of my own. "Not very likely," I admitted. "Probably not," she agreed. "People who have benefited from an unequal relationship rarely want to examine that inequality. It's easier for them to blame you for changing than to acknowledge that the dynamic was unhealthy to begin with." Over the next hour, Alexa helped me understand that what I was experiencing wasn't just personal disappointment, it was grief. I was mourning the death of relationships that I had thought were based on love, but were actually based on utility. I was grieving the mother-offspring connections I had always hoped we would have, and accepting the transactional arrangements that actually existed. "The good news," Alexa said, "is that you get to decide what comes next. You've spent 35 years living according to their expectations. Now you get to discover who you are when you're living according to your own." That afternoon, she took me to meet some of the other women in our age group who had gone through similar family reckonings. We gathered in the community center's garden room, a sunny space filled with plants and comfortable chairs, and I listened to stories that sounded remarkably similar to my own. There was Kelly Stone, a 60-year-old former nurse whose adult son had moved back in with her after his divorce and treated her like a live-in housekeeper while contributing nothing to household expenses. After 2 years of being taken advantage of, she had given him 30 days to find his own place. "He called me heartless," she said with a wry smile. "But you know what? I sleep better at night knowing I'm not enabling his irresponsibility anymore." There was Millie Diaz, whose 3 daughters had expected her to provide free childcare for their 6 grandchildren while they all worked full-time jobs. When she finally said she wanted to travel and pursue her own interests, they had accused her of abandoning the family. She had stood firm, and now she was planning a trip to Italy with the money she had been spending on constant childcare expenses. The hardest part, Millie told me, was realizing that I had trained them to see me as a resource instead of a person. But the best part was discovering that I could retrain them. Or at least, I could retrain myself to stop accepting their poor treatment. As I listened to these women share their experiences, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine community. These weren't people who wanted anything from me. They weren't measuring my worth by what I could provide for them. They were simply women who understood what I was going through because they had lived it themselves. That evening, Kelly invited me to join her for dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. It had been months since I had eaten a meal that I hadn't cooked myself, and years since I had dined out with someone who was more interested in my thoughts and feelings than in what favors I might be able to do for them. "Tell me about yourself," Kelly said as we waited for our food to arrive. "Not about your kids or your job or your responsibilities. Tell me about you. What do you love? What makes you happy?" It was such a simple question, but I found myself struggling to answer it. For so long, my identity had been entirely wrapped up in my relationships to other people that I had forgotten what I actually enjoyed for its own sake. "I love taking photographs," I said slowly, testing out the words. "And I love reading, mysteries especially. I love the smell of coffee in the morning and the way light looks different at sunset than it does at noon. I love learning new things, even though I haven't had much opportunity to do that lately." "What would you like to learn?" Kelly asked. "I've always wanted to take a cooking class," I admitted. "Not just practical cooking for feeding a family, but real cooking. French techniques, maybe, or how to make proper pasta from scratch." "There's a culinary arts program at the community college," Kelly said. "I know because I've been thinking about taking some classes myself. We could look into it together." The idea of taking a class purely for my own enjoyment, with no one to cook for but myself, felt revolutionary. Over the next few weeks, my new support system became a lifeline. When my offspring's angry calls and manipulative text messages became overwhelming, I had people to talk to who understood exactly what I was experiencing. When I felt guilty for setting boundaries, I had friends who reminded me that healthy relationships required mutual respect and reciprocity. Alexa introduced me to the concept of gray rock, responding to manipulative behavior with boring, minimal answers that didn't provide any emotional fuel for their drama. Instead of defending myself or explaining my choices, I learned to say things like, "I understand you're upset," and "I've made my decision," and then end the conversation. The photography group became my creative outlet, giving me a reason to explore the Pacific Northwest and develop skills that were purely for my own satisfaction. The book club introduced me to authors I had never heard of, and discussions that challenged my thinking in ways I hadn't experienced since college. Most importantly, these new relationships showed me what healthy connections looked like. People asked about my well-being without wanting anything in return. They offered help without expecting payment. They respected my boundaries and celebrated my growth instead of trying to sabotage it. For the first time in my adult life, I was experiencing what it felt like to be valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. But the most significant change was happening internally. As I spent less time managing other people's lives and more time focusing on my own interests and goals, I began to rediscover the woman I had been before I became everyone's go-to problem solver. She was more interesting than I had remembered. She had opinions and dreams and a sense of humor that had been buried under years of self-sacrifice. She was capable of joy that wasn't dependent on other people's approval. She was worth knowing and worth caring about, even if her own offspring couldn't see it. 3 months after my breaking point confrontation, I was sitting in my living room on a Saturday morning, reviewing the photos I had taken on a recent trip to Crater Lake, when I realized something profound. I hadn't thought about my offspring's needs or problems for an entire week. It wasn't that I had stopped loving them. It was that I had stopped making intro hook. When my 3 grown offspring left me stranded at the doctor's office for 8 hours without a word, I realized they saw me as nothing more than a burden to manage. My name is Jade Russell, and at 58, I discovered that the people I'd sacrificed everything for couldn't even be bothered to pick up their phone when I needed them most. But what they didn't know was that I'd been sitting on a family secret worth over $2 million. AI, trust fund from my late mother that I'd never touched, always planning to leave it to them. That day, sitting alone in that sterile waiting room, watching other families come and go while mine disappeared into their busy lives, something inside me shifted forever. I made a decision that would shock them to their core and change everything. They knew about their devoted, selfless mother. Sometimes the people who take you for granted need to learn what life looks like when you stop giving them everything they never appreciated. The knock on my door came on a Thursday evening in early February, just as I was settling in with a cup of tea and the novel my book club was discussing that week. I had been enjoying 3 months of relative peace, having successfully trained my offspring to expect less immediate availability from me through consistent boundary enforcement. When I opened the door, I found all 3 of them standing on my front porch. But something was different this time. Instead of the entitled anger I had grown accustomed to, they looked subdued, almost sheepish. Haley was holding a bouquet of flowers, Preston had a grocery bag in his hands, and Wyatt was carrying what appeared to be a homemade card. "Hi, Mom," Haley said tentatively. "Can we come in? We'd like to talk." I studied their faces for a moment, noting the absence of their usual demanding energy. "About what?" "About us," Preston said quietly. "About our family." I stepped aside and let them in, curious despite myself. They arranged themselves in my living room with uncharacteristic politeness, waiting for me to sit down before they took their own seats. "Mom," Haley began, setting the flowers on my coffee table. "We've been doing some thinking about what you said a few months ago, about how we've been treating you." "And?" I prompted, keeping my voice neutral. "And we realized that maybe we haven't been as appreciative as we should have been," Preston continued. "We brought you some groceries as a thank you for everything you've done for us over the years." Wyatt held up his card. "I made this for you. It says thank you for being such a devoted mother and always being there when we needed you." I looked at them sitting in my living room, making what was clearly a coordinated effort to win me back, and felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of me was touched by the gesture. It was more acknowledgement than I had received from them in years. But another part of me recognized the manipulation inherent in their approach. "This is very thoughtful," I said carefully. "What prompted this change of heart?" They exchanged glances, and I could see them silently negotiating who would speak first. "Well," Haley said finally, "things have been different since you started doing your own thing, and we miss having you more involved in our lives." "Different how?" "Harder," Preston admitted. "I didn't realize how much I relied on you to help me figure things out. When my business partnership fell through last month, I really could have used your advice. And I've been struggling with the little ones," Haley added. "Emma's been acting out at school, and Tyler's been having trouble with his math homework. I used to just bring them to you when things got difficult, but I wasn't available," I finished. "Right. And we realized that we probably took your help for granted." Wyatt nodded eagerly. "We want to do better, Mom. We want to have a real relationship with you, not just, the old way." I set down my teacup and looked at each of them in turn. "What does doing better look like to you?" "We want to spend more time with you," Haley said. "Maybe have family dinners again. Include you more in what's happening in our lives. And we want to help you more," Preston added, "with things around the house or driving you to appointments, whatever you need." "We want to be the kind of offspring you deserve," Wyatt said, his voice earnest and sincere. It was exactly what I had longed to hear from them for years. The acknowledgement, the apology, the promise to do better, all of it was everything I had dreamed they might eventually say. But I had learned something important during my months of independence. Words were easy, but patterns of behavior were hard to change. And I had also learned to trust my instincts about people's motivations. "I appreciate you coming here to say this," I said slowly. "But I'm curious about the timing. Why now? What's changed?" Again, the guilty glance exchange. "Nothing's changed," Haley said quickly. "We just finally realized what we were missing." "Really?" Because 3 months ago, you told me I was being selfish for wanting my own life. You said I was destroying our family. What made you realize I was right? The silence stretched uncomfortably. We missed you, Preston said finally. You missed me, or you missed what I did for you? Both? Wyatt offered weakly. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, ostensibly to refill my tea, but really, to give myself a moment to think. Through the pass-through window, I could see them whispering urgently among themselves, clearly not expecting this level of resistance to their olive branch. When I returned to the living room, I had made a decision. I'm willing to work on rebuilding our relationships, I said, and I saw all three of them visibly relax. But it's going to be different this time. I'm not going back to being available on demand or solving problems that you're perfectly capable of handling yourselves. Of course not, Haley said quickly. We understand that now. Do you? Because understanding and accepting are two different things. Let me be very clear about what our new relationship looks like. I sat back down and looked at each of them seriously. First, I will not be your emergency childcare anymore, Haley. If you need someone to watch Emma and Tyler, you'll need to ask me at least a week in advance, and you'll need to accept that I might say no if I have other plans. Haley's smile faltered slightly. Well, of course, but what if there's a real emergency? A real emergency is a trip to the hospital, not a last-minute work meeting or a date night with David. Okay, she said, though she didn't look happy about it. Second, Preston, I will not be co-signing any more loans, investing in any more business ventures, or providing emergency funding for your various projects. You're 29 years old. Your financial problems are yours to solve. But what if I really need help? He asked. Then you'll figure it out like any other adult would. You'll go to a bank, or you'll scale back your plans until they match your resources. That seems harsh, he muttered. Third, Wyatt, I will not be your backup plan for when your freelance income isn't sufficient to cover your expenses. No more borrowing money. No more expecting me to cover your rent when clients don't pay on time. Mom, freelance work is unpredictable. Then, maybe you need to find more predictable work, or develop better financial planning skills, or find clients who pay more reliably. Those are your choices to make. But we're family, Haley protested. Family helps each other. Yes, they do, I agreed. Which brings me to my next point. From now on, help goes both ways. If you want my support, I expect yours in return. What does that mean? Preston asked warily. It means you call me once a week, just to see how I'm doing, not because you need something. It means you remember my birthday without being reminded. It means if I ask you to drive me to an appointment or help me with something around the house, you don't make me feel like I'm imposing on your busy schedule. That's reasonable, Wyatt said, though he looked uncertain. And it means you respect my time and my choices. I have my own interests now, my own friends, my own schedule. You don't get to show up here unannounced and expect me to drop everything. For you. So we need to make appointments to see our own mother? Haley asked, a trace of her old indignation creeping back into her voice. You need to call first and make sure I'm available, just like you would with any other person you respect. They sat in silence for a moment, processing these new terms. And if we don't agree to these conditions? Preston asked. Then we don't have a relationship, I said simply. I've learned that I can be perfectly happy living my own life without constantly managing yours. I'm offering you a chance to be part of my life as adult offspring who respect and value their mother. But I'm not negotiating a return to the old dynamic where I exist solely for your convenience. The room fell quiet, except for the ticking of my grandmother's clock on the mantel. This feels like blackmail, Haley said finally. No, I replied, calmly. Blackmail would be threatening to harm you if you don't comply. This is me establishing the terms under which I'm willing to have relationships with you. You're free to accept them or reject them, but those are your only two choices. You're really different, Mom, Wyatt observed, and I couldn't tell if he meant it as a compliment or a criticism. Yes, I am. I'm happier, healthier, and have more self-respect than I've had in decades. And I'm not going back to being the woman who disappeared into everyone else's needs. They left that evening without giving me a definitive answer, taking their flowers and groceries and handmade card with them. As I watched them drive away, I felt a mixture of hope and resignation. Hope, because they had at least acknowledged that our old dynamic was problematic. Resignation, because I suspected that their willingness to change would last only as long as it took them to realize I was serious about my boundaries. Over the following weeks, I watched their efforts to adapt to the new boundaries with a mixture of amusement and sadness. Preston called exactly once, on a Sunday evening, clearly forcing himself through an awkward conversation about my week and my photography hobby. The call lasted 12 minutes, and I could practically hear him checking items off a mental list. Haley made a genuine effort for about 2 weeks, calling to chat and even inviting me to Emma's soccer game. But when I wasn't available to babysit during her anniversary dinner because I had book club that evening, her patience with the new me began to wear thin. "Mom, it's our anniversary," she said, as if that trumped my own commitments. "Can't you skip book club just this once?" "No," I said simply. "You have 2 weeks' notice to find alternative childcare." The silence on the other end of the line spoke volumes. Wyatt lasted the longest, perhaps because his requests had always been the most sporadic. But when his latest client delayed payment and he casually mentioned that rent was due, his disappointment at my lack of financial rescue was palpable. "So you're really not going to help me at all?" he asked, genuine surprise in his voice. "I'm not going to solve a problem that you need to solve yourself," I corrected. "That's not the same thing as not helping you." "How is that helping?" "Because learning to manage your own finances is a life skill you're going to need, whether I'm here or not." 3 months into their reformation, the mask finally slipped completely, and I realized that my decision about the trust fund was about to become very relevant indeed. The complete breakdown of their reformation happened on a Tuesday morning. In late May, exactly 1 year after my first medical episode had opened my eyes to their true nature, I was in my garden, planting tomatoes for what I had decided would be my last season in this house, when Haley's car screeched into my driveway. She burst through my back gate without knocking, her face flushed with anger and desperation. Behind her came Preston and Wyatt, both looking equally agitated. "Mom, we need to talk," Haley announced, marching across my freshly planted flower beds without any regard for the work I had just completed. "You're destroying my garden," I said calmly, not looking up from the tomato seedling I was carefully positioning. "Forget the garden," Preston exploded. "We just found out something that changes everything." I continued planting, though my hands had started to tremble slightly. I had a suspicion about what they had discovered. "Mrs. Patterson told us," Wyatt said, his voice a mixture of accusation and disbelief. "She mentioned something about your mother's inheritance, about money you've had this whole time." I set down my gardening trowel and finally looked up at them. "What exactly did Mrs. Patterson tell you?" "That your mother left you a substantial inheritance 15 years ago," Haley said, her voice rising with each word. "That you've been sitting on a fortune while we've all been struggling financially." "How much, Mom?" Preston demanded. "How much money have you been hiding from us?" I stood up slowly, brushing the dirt from my gardening gloves. "I haven't been hiding anything. I simply chose not to discuss my private financial affairs with you." "Your private financial affairs?" Haley's voice reached a pitch that made the neighbor's dog start barking. "We're your family. We're your offspring. How could you watch us struggle when you had money the whole time?" "Struggle?" I looked at each of them in turn. "Preston, you drive a BMW that's only 2 years old. Haley, you just got back from a vacation to Hawaii. Wyatt, you live in a trendy downtown loft that costs more per month than most people make in salary. What exactly have you been struggling with?" "That's not the point," Preston snapped. "The point is you lied to us." I never lied to you. I simply didn't tell you about money that belonged to me and had nothing to do with you. Had nothing to do with us? Wyatt's voice cracked with emotion. Mom, I've been living paycheck to paycheck for years. Do you know how many opportunities I've missed because I couldn't afford to take risks? How many times I've had to turn down projects because I needed the guaranteed income? And I've been working myself to death trying to provide for my family, Haley added. Do you know what it's like trying to balance a demanding career with raising 2 little ones? I could have reduced my hours, spent more time with Emma and Tyler, if I'd known we had family money to fall back on. It's not family money, I said quietly. It's my money, from my mother, who specifically instructed me to watch how you treated me before deciding what to do with it. The garden fell silent except for the sound of sprinklers running in the distance. What do you mean? Preston asked, his voice suddenly wary. My mother was a wise woman. She told me to observe how you behaved toward me when you thought I had nothing. She said that would tell me everything I needed to know about your character. I walked over to my garden bench and sat down, looking at the 3 adults who had once been the center of my universe. For 15 years, I've watched. I've watched you treat me like an unpaid employee. I've watched you take my time, my energy, my money, and my love for granted. I've watched you show up only when you needed something and disappear the moment your crisis was resolved. That's not fair, Haley protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time any of you called me just to see how I was doing? When was the last time you offered to help me with something without being asked? When was the last time you remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding you? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Your mother's test wasn't about the money, I continued. It was about love. Real love versus conditional love. And all 3 of you have shown me, repeatedly and consistently, that your love for me is entirely conditional on what I can provide for you. So you're punishing us, Preston said bitterly. You're punishing us for not being perfect. No, I said, standing up and facing them. I'm protecting myself from people who see me as a resource instead of a person, and I'm making a decision about what to do with the inheritance my mother left me. What kind of decision? Wyatt asked, though I could see in his eyes that he already suspected he wouldn't like the answer. I'm donating it, I said simply. All of it. To the community center's senior support program and to a scholarship fund for first-generation college students. The explosion of outrage was immediate and predictable. You can't do that, Haley screamed. That money belongs to our family. That money belongs to me, I corrected. And I've decided to give it to people who actually need it, not to adults who have confused wanting with needing. This is insane, Preston said, pacing back and forth across my garden. Mom, you're talking about millions of dollars. Do you have any idea what that money could mean for our futures? I have a very clear idea, I said. It would mean that you would never have to learn to stand on your own feet. It would mean that you could continue treating me like an ATM with legs for the rest of my life. It would mean that Emma and Tyler would grow up watching their parents manipulate their grandmother for money instead of learning to build genuine relationships based on love and respect. Love and respect. You're being vindictive, Haley accused, tears streaming down her face. You're punishing us because we haven't been perfect offspring. I'm not punishing you, I said gently. I'm freeing all of us. I'm freeing you from the burden of pretending to love me in order to access my money. And I'm freeing myself from the burden of wondering whether your affection is genuine or calculated. But what about Emma and Tyler? Haley tried one last manipulation. What about their college funds, their future opportunities? Emma and Tyler have 2 capable parents with good jobs and the ability to plan for their future. They don't need their grandmother's money. They need their grandmother's love, which they will always have. But they also need to see their parents behaving like decent human beings, which they haven't been seeing lately. I walked toward my back door, then turned around one final time. The donation will be completed by the end of this week. The community center is naming their new senior support wing the Eleanor Russell Center after my mother. I think she would be proud that her money is going to help people who actually need assistance, not to enable the entitlement of her grandchildren. "Mom, please," Wyatt said, his voice breaking. "Don't do this. We can change. We can be better." "You've had 35 years to be better," I said sadly. "And 15 years since I started this test. The only time you've shown any interest in changing is when you found out about the money. That tells me everything I need to know." As I walked into my house and closed the door behind me, I could hear them arguing among themselves in my garden. Haley was crying. Preston was shouting about legal options. Wyatt was begging them to think of some way to change my mind. But I was done listening to their drama. I was done being the central figure in their emotional chaos. I had made my decision, and for the first time in my adult life, it was a decision based entirely on my own values and judgment. The next morning, I called my lawyer and financial advisor to begin the process of donating the inheritance. That afternoon, I called a realtor to put my house on the market. I had decided to downsize to a smaller place closer to the community center and my new friends. I was starting over at 59, and it felt like the beginning of my real life rather than the end of anything important. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from all 3 of my offspring. It was a formal, typed document that their lawyer had clearly helped them craft. It accused me of elder abuse, financial irresponsibility, and emotional manipulation. It threatened legal action to contest the donation and claimed that I was not of sound mind when I made the decision to give away their inheritance. I read it once, then put it in my fireplace and watched it burn. For the first time in my adult life, someone else's emotional crisis was not my problem to solve, and the freedom was intoxicating. 2 years later, I was standing in the bright, airy lobby of the Eleanor Russell Senior Support Center, watching as dozens of older adults participated in activities that brought genuine joy to their lives. Art classes, book clubs, technology workshops, social gatherings, all funded by my mother's inheritance and managed by people who understood that seniors deserve dignity, respect, and community. I had been volunteering here 3 days a week since the center opened, helping coordinate the photography program that had become one of their most popular offerings. Today was special, though. Today was the center's 2nd anniversary celebration, and I had been asked to speak about the inspiration behind the donation. As I looked out at the crowd of seniors, their families, and community supporters, I spotted 3 familiar figures standing awkwardly near the back of the room. Preston, Haley, and Wyatt had come to the celebration, though I doubted it was to celebrate anything I had accomplished. I hadn't spoken to any of them since the day they had threatened me with legal action. Their lawyer had quickly informed them that a person has the absolute right to donate their own money to charity, and that no court would overturn such a decision unless there was clear evidence of mental incapacity, which their own previous acknowledgments of my competence made impossible to prove. "Ladies and gentlemen," the center director announced, "I'd like to introduce Jade Russell, whose generous donation made this center possible and whose volunteer work has touched so many lives here." As I walked to the podium, I caught sight of my offspring's faces. They looked older, more tired than I remembered. Good, I thought. Maybe life had finally taught them some lessons that I had failed to impart. "Thank you," I began, looking out at the crowd of people who had become my chosen family over the past 2 years. When my mother left me an inheritance 15 years ago, she gave me more than money. She gave me a test of character, not mine, but others. She told me to watch how people treated me when they thought I had nothing, because that would show me who they really were. I could see my offspring shifting uncomfortably in the back. I spent 15 years learning that some people see love as a service they're owed, rather than a relationship they participate in. I learned that enabling someone's selfishness isn't kindness, it's cruelty, both to them and to yourself. My voice grew stronger as I continued. But I also learned that it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to build the life you actually want instead of the life others expect you to live. This center exists because I finally chose my own values over other people's expectations. The applause was warm and genuine, the kind of appreciation I had never received from the people I had spent decades serving. After the ceremony, I was surrounded by friends and fellow volunteers sharing stories and laughter. From the corner of my eye, I could see my offspring hovering at the edges of the crowd, clearly wanting to approach me, but uncertain of their reception. Finally, as the crowd began to thin, they made their way over. "Hello, Mom," Haley said quietly. She looked genuinely nervous, a far cry from the entitled anger she had displayed 2 years ago. Haley, Preston, Wyatt. I acknowledged each of them with polite distance. This is really impressive," Preston said, gesturing around the bustling center. What we've built here, I corrected, indicating the staff and volunteers around us. I just provided funding. The real work is done by people who genuinely care about serving others. The pointed emphasis wasn't lost on any of them. "Mom," Wyatt said, his voice smaller than I had ever heard it. We came to apologize," Haley finished. "We've had 2 years to think about everything that happened, about how we treated you. We were wrong." I studied their faces, looking for signs of the manipulation I had become so good at recognizing. What I saw instead was something I hadn't expected. Genuine remorse mixed with the kind of humility that only comes from real consequences. "What changed?" I asked simply. "Everything," Preston said. "When you cut us off, we had to figure out how to manage our own lives. It was harder than we expected." "Haley had to learn how to balance work and parenting without using you as a safety net," Wyatt added. "I had to learn how to manage money and build real client relationships. Preston had to accept that his business ideas needed to succeed on their own merit." "And we realized," Haley said, her eyes filling with tears, "that we had never actually learned how to be adults. We had just learned how to use you." The admission hung in the air between us. "We don't expect forgiveness," Preston said quickly. "We know we don't deserve it. But we wanted you to know that losing you, really losing you, taught us things that having access to your money never could have." I looked at these 3 people who had once been the center of my universe, who had caused me so much pain, and felt something unexpected. Not love, not forgiveness, but a kind of peaceful indifference. "I'm glad you learned those lessons," I said sincerely. "Everyone deserves to grow into the person they're capable of being." "Is there," Wyatt started hopefully, "is there any chance we could try to rebuild some kind of relationship? Different. This time. Better." I considered the question seriously. They seemed genuinely changed, humbled by the consequences of their actions in a way that my previous boundary setting had never achieved. But I had also learned something important about myself over the past 2 years. "I have a full life now," I said gently. "I have meaningful work, genuine friendships, and a sense of purpose that doesn't depend on being needed by people who don't appreciate me. I've learned that I don't need to maintain relationships with people just because we share DNA." The words clearly stung, but they nodded in understanding. "That said," I continued, "if you ever want to volunteer here at the center, you're welcome to apply. Not because you're my offspring, but because this community can always use people who genuinely want to serve others." It was perhaps the most generous offer I could make, a chance to earn their way back into my life through service to others, rather than service to themselves. As they walked away, I felt no sadness, no regret, no lingering wish that things could be different. I had spent 2 years building a life that fulfilled me completely, and I was no longer willing to compromise that peace for anyone. Later that evening, I sat in my small apartment, looking through the photos I had taken at the celebration. Images, of seniors laughing, learning, connecting with each other. Images of a community built on mutual respect and genuine care. My phone rang. It was Alexa, calling to debrief about the day's events. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Seeing them again after all this time?" "Free," I said without hesitation. "For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely free." And I was. Free from guilt, free from obligation, free from the exhausting work of trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it. Had finally learned the most important lesson of all. The only person responsible for my happiness was me, and I was spectacularly happy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't. Want to pass these up? Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.